I've got Mr. Barrett followed by Mr. Villemure. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett. Please, you have the floor.
Chair, I'm going to move a motion in regards to Minister Randy Boissonnault's involvement in global health imports and the firm's contracts with the Government of Canada. The committee called the following witnesses: Shauna Parker and Felix Papineau of Global Health Imports, Minister Randy Boissonnault, and Melvina Gowie. I've sent that to the clerk in both official languages, Chair, and I'd like to speak to the motion.
Okay, the motion is in order. Madam Clerk, have you shared that motion with members of the committee? It'll be coming around in a second. Mr. Barrett, you said you'd like to speak to the motion. Go ahead, sir.
Chair, it's a bit like Groundhog Day when it comes to this scandal with Randy Boissonnault, and it continues to both get headlines but concern Canadians. And with respect to our obligation and our mandate under the Conflict of Interest Act and the obligations of that minister to abide by it. And we've had appearances at this committee by the minister, by his business partners, and the minister claimed that he was not the person in question, that it was another Randy, that it wasn't him. But we have now new text messages or WhatsApp messages that are from Stephen Anderson from 2022. Say, I just updated Felix and Randy, and we've got another. I won't tell Shauna and Felix and Randy yet. Now, while Mr. Anderson, the business partner, the 50% business partner with Justin Trudeau's minister from Edmonton, Randy Boissonnault, he claimed it was an autocorrect.
9 times.
9 times. But we now have more messages, so it would have to be more than 9 times. But in none of those 9 instances, nor in the new documents, does anyone ask, oh, who do you mean? Because I'm not familiar with that name. Oh, is that a typo? Is it someone else? No, they say it's Randy. Now, Randy has said that he's not the Randy in question. But we also have confirmation that there was no other Randy who worked at this firm. So we later learned that when the Liberal minister from Edmonton had said that he couldn't have communicated with his business partner Stephen Anderson on the dates in question, he was at a Liberal cabinet retreat and he was in a room impenetrable by electronic communications, and his phone was locked in a box and buried under the building. Well, he did actually exchange text messages and have a phone call with his business partner, Stephen Anderson. So it's another example where we see that this Liberal minister is not being truthful. We also know that while he was a 50% owner of the company, they won a contract with the Government of Canada. Well, he was sitting around the cabinet table. Of course, none of these things are acceptable, but what is of paramount importance is that when we have an issue like we did with Mr. Anderson, who this committee did vote by majority to send to the House, that he had been in contempt and had prevaricated when he was here, and the Speaker has ruled on that. Well, now we have an issue of a similar nature with respect to the minister. So I'm not today looking for the committee to take a decision on if there's been a contempt by the minister, but I do think that we need information about this. And while these text messages or WhatsApp messages add a new dimension to what this committee's dealing with, it comes down to whether or not the minister was honest when he testified at this committee. But there's a story in the National Post today that says, Liberal minister's former business questioned over Indigenous claims in government contract bids. And it's highly suspicious at best. But at worst, it's fraud. And so, well, that issue is one that perhaps we can discuss another day. it does certainly speak to the apparent dishonesty by the minister. We can't have people come before parliamentary committees and do anything other than tell us the truth. They can't not answer the question, and they can't lie to us.
Right.
So we do need answers to that. It is incumbent on this committee. And what we've heard time and time again from members of the Liberal Party is that, well, the ethics commissioner looked at it and said it was fine. Well, then he had to look at it again because it turns out he wasn't given all of the information. And then he had to look at it again because he wasn't given all of the information. I think that he's going to find himself surprised that he was again deprived of all of the information. But that's for the ethics commissioner to decide. He can take his own, he can take his decisions about what he would like to do. But this committee is solely responsible for whether or not we permit people to come before this committee and lie. And so we need to get answers, and it's important that the witnesses that are proposed in the motion also come and speak to this, because we've seen so far that the co-owners of the company have demonstrated themselves not to be honest. We are not looking for Mr. Anderson to return. The committee has taken a decision with respect to his conduct before this committee, referred it to the House, and the House will deal with it. But we do need to speak to another parliamentarian, his business partner, Mr. Boissonnault, and we need to hear from these two folks who come up every single time the minister's name is mentioned, and that's Shauna and Felix. No one in this committee should want to be made a fool of by people who are invited to come before us. But that's what's happening. We are being made a fool of by these witnesses who have come before the committee, and it can't be allowed to stand that Randy Boissonnault can offer a different set of facts in answering the same question every time he comes before the committee. He needs to come here, tell us the truth, and then we can move on. But until we've finally got the truth, then this committee needs to undertake this study and get resolution.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I have Mr. Genuis next, followed by Ms. Shanahan, and then Mr. Cooper. Go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to speak in support of this motion for Mr. Barrett to bring back Liberal Minister Randy Boissonnault here to the Ethics Committee. And in particular, I want to speak to the issue of claims made that his company, a company that he owned as minister that was also seeking federal government contracts, claims that this company was Indigenous. Now, the Government Operations Committee that I serve as a regular member on has been investigating this government's Indigenous procurement scandal. And we've been undertaking this investigation really at the request and in response to concerns that have been raised by Indigenous leaders themselves. Indigenous leaders have asked the Auditor General to look into the contracting scandal. And the basis of this scandal is basically that well-connected non-Indigenous elites have been able to take for themselves contracts that are supposed to go to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous businesses. It is cultural appropriation leading to financial misappropriation. It's people pretending to be Indigenous or entering into shady joint ventures where most of the benefit and most of the action is happening on the non-Indigenous side to try to appropriate benefits through these kinds of arrangements away from Indigenous communities towards well-connected non-Indigenous insiders. And this is a problem that we have become aware of, that we've been investigating for a number of months. And in fact, the AFN, Chief Bernard from the AFN said that in their view, most of those contracts from the Indigenous procurement set aside are going to shell companies. So this is a huge problem. It's a problem that has been brought to Parliament by Indigenous leaders themselves, and it's a problem that we have been trying to get to the bottom of. Meanwhile, Liberals have been saying, oh, there's nothing to see here, no big deal, we're trying to check the box and wanting to move on, rather than actually get into the substance of the issue and really take seriously what we're hearing from Indigenous leaders. Then we have today this revelation, though, that not only is it just well-connected elite insiders taking advantage of this program, but it is the most well-connected elite insider possible. That is a minister of the Crown. His own company has been trying to get contracts on the basis of a claim that the company is Indigenous owned. And looking back at the record, Minister Boissonnault has made all kinds of contradictory claims regarding his identity in various places, in various publications. And in the House today, the Liberals admitted, in fact, in response to a question period, they admitted that this business was never on the Indigenous business list. So the government is saying that that this company wasn't on the Indigenous business list, and yet the minister's company was making the claim that they were Indigenous on the basis of inconsistent claims about identity that the minister has made. So this is a very serious issue because we can see the legacy of various things that have been done to Indigenous peoples, tragic rates of poverty, and therefore the urgency of fully including Indigenous peoples in the economy, of supporting measures that advance economic development. And yet we have measures announced by the government then being taken advantage of by elite insiders, including a company that in the course of trying to get these contracts claimed to be fully Indigenous owned and that was able to do business with the government to their advantage. So we very much need to get to the bottom of these claims and the involvement of Minister Boissonnault in this very serious Liberal Indigenous procurement scandal. So I'm very supportive of the motion and look forward to him being brought back to testify before this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Genius. Monsieur Villemur, je m'excuse, mais j'ai supposé que tu...
Mr. Villemur, I apologize, but I thought you wanted to speak to something else. Okay, all right, thank you.
Chair, and it appears that this is where I came into this committee, was regarding this Mr. Anderson. It seems so sinister. This Mr. Anderson, who apparently has been playing fast and loose with using the name of Minister Boissonnault in his business dealings, on a multiple of occasions. And I seem to remember that when I came in, I think we were seeing the ethics commissioner for something like the third time, apparently, where we were questioning the ethics commissioner regarding these texts. And the commissioner had reiterated how he had conducted his investigation, and he was very clear about how he goes about his work. He's an independent officer of Parliament. He obviously takes this very seriously. It's the credibility of not only himself, but that institution, that role, that is coming under question when members of Parliament, particularly members of the official opposition, when they don't get what they want, that they repeatedly are calling for further investigations and questioning. Indeed, the report that the Commissioner of Conflict of Interest and Ethics had put forth to us. So it's, and indeed, the Minister Boissonnault had provided those text messages. I remember looking at them and saying, like, okay, what is this? This is like just, it was a banal thing about some kind of telecom thing or something, to check back, the sort of routine thing that when you leave a place of work, somebody's looking for you, looking for a contact. And so he said, no, I'm not involved in this anymore. And please contact the person that that is handling this business. So it's, this kind of mishmash of bits and pieces of text messages and WhatsApp messages and so on that actually showed that the minister had nothing to do with the business dealings of this Mr. Anderson. But this Mr. Anderson certainly demonstrated, from what I understand, now I wasn't there for his testimony, but I'm sure that colleagues here will fill us in, was very free and easy, apparently, with using the name of the minister. And from what I'm told about the character and conduct of that person, it certainly appears that he was doing it for his own purposes, his own profit, his own ends, and it's kind of a lesson to all of us to be careful about who we get involved in when that day comes that we find ourselves in the private sector. And in fact, I think it again, I found it very interesting at that point when I came into this committee, that the ethics commissioner was able to talk about the rules around conflict of interest and the responsibilities of members, and indeed we heard something of that earlier in the week when we heard from the lobbying commissioner. Did we not? So at the same time, we have just completed what I think was a very fulsome report around misinformation and disinformation. And I know that there are other motions that are on the table that concern the privacy concerns of Canadians. I was very glad, Chair, that you were able to arrange for the testimony of the I guess you could call them the Big Four, the Facebook, X, TikTok, and who was the other one? Maybe there were two of them there from Facebook. I forget now. But I was very glad, and my constituents were very glad to see that this committee was undertaking that work to question les géants de web, as we call them in French, around the safeguarding of confidential data, how that data is used in algorithms, how that data is used in marketing purposes, and so on. And I think it is, again, goes to how we need to be very mindful that these bits and pieces of texts and messages and so on that people are trying to piece together to create a case. It really is. I don't think it's worthy of the work of this committee. But it's interesting what Mr. Genuis brought up, because that was from another committee that I was sitting on public accounts, when we were being made aware that there are companies that kind of specialize in Indigenous procurement, in obtaining obtaining public contracts, sort of using the set-aside for Indigenous procurement. And in fact, that there was one fellow, and Chair, I'm a paper person. my staff is trying to get me to get weaned off of paper. But I have this with me, and this is the David Yo, who was very proud to tell us that not only was he's a co-owner there of Dalian and Enterprises that uses this Indigenous, so I'm sure that this is being studied in public accounts, but that he was a Conservative member, and he was very proud to show us that this was sort of his claim to fame and how he was able to go and attract customers because he was able to attract contracts for them. So, again, going to this, and I wouldn't say it's a gray area. I think it's quite clear.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
People do need
point of order.
to conduct themselves.
On a point of order, Mr. Genuis, not debate. Point of order, please.
Is it correct that Mr. Yo actually ran for a different political party in the last
What's the
election?
actual point of
though?
It's a
order?
point of
Chair?
debate.
I
That's a point of
apologize.
debate.
It
Thank
wasn't
you.
actually
Ms.
related to
Shanahan, go ahead, please.
PPC candidate, was that it?
That's it.
Yeah,
I-
there
I was-
it is. There it is.
Could we clarify if she's allowed to use props,
That's
though?
it, Mr. Genuis. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Shanahan. Go ahead.
Aren't they just a satellite party? If we're talking about the PPC, Maxime Bernier, whoever hears, what is he doing these days? Do we even know Maxime Bernier? Aucune idée. Aucune idée. That's right. Well, it's so again, if I look at this motion, it seems that we're trying to get back with another kick at the can. The ethics commissioner, I think, is going to be very right when he finally appears before us to talk about his budget and his office and so on, to say that he has to put aside a special budget just for these repetitive, redundant, frivolous attempts by opposition members to drag somebody into the mud. And so I'm really, as a serious member of this committee, I am really taken aback that once again we are back discussing these points. It's very clear to me again, and I think that was a unanimous motion, if I'm correct. That that Mr. Anderson is that not the subject of how many privilege motions? Is that not the subject of one of the privilege motions? That are before the House right now. So I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of piling on in this regard, and I would suggest that for clarity and for kind of keeping things on the right path, maybe one thing at a time would be a good strategy. But I digress. Chair, I really think that it's clear to me that there are obligations that we as MPs and as cabinet ministers have even more obligations. I'm happy to see the ethics commissioner really any time of the day or of week to further explain that, because that was something that I remember in my first round in this committee that we were very cognizant that many members really didn't have a good understanding of their duties under the conflict of interest and ethics legislation. And, people have been caught inadvertently. And I pride myself as somebody that's, former banker and so on, to put together your assets and liabilities and, revenue sources and your investments and so on. I pride myself in being pretty good at that. But even still, it can happen that you forget something. You have a separate account for a TFSA or something. And I'm always very pleased when someone from the office of the ethics, the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commission takes the time, gives us a call, explains what it is, and we're able to correct. Because, you know, God forbid that something should be posted and it's not correct. And I'm one of those people. To be hauled in front of this committee, to explain myself and so on. I don't think any member of Parliament would enjoy that. So I think that we have to let the commissioner do his work. He has, in this case, on 3 different occasions. Am I right? I believe it is on 3 different occasions, 3 different reports. And he has assured us that if there's any concerns, that he would be, of course, the first one to be cognizant and seized with having to do what would need to be done in that case, further investigations, further interviews, and so forth. So I don't understand really why the Conservatives are not willing to let the commissioner do his work. It would seem to me that there are other better things that we could be doing. There's more productive things that we could be doing to be serving our constituents, and I'm quite sure that the other opposition members here would feel the same way. So Chair, I'm still putting my thoughts together on this. I would like to, please, if you can put me back on the list, because I'd like to come back and after I've gathered my thoughts a little bit. But those were just some preliminary observations that I wanted to make. Thank you.
So I put the member from Chateauguay-Lacole back on the list, Ms. Shanahan. I'm going to go to Mr. Cooper next. Go ahead.
Be on the list, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Shanahan alleged that Conservatives are bringing forward frivolous ethics complaints. I would remind Ms. Shanahan, through you, Mr. Chair, of the litany of guilty findings by the Ethics Commissioner with respect to key figures in this government. We have the Prime Minister, who was found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act, not once, but twice. The first Prime Minister in Canadian history to be found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act. How about the current Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, guilty of contravening the Conflict of Interest Act? And then there's the Trade Minister, Mary Ying, guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act. And remember Bill Morneau, the former Finance Minister under Justin Trudeau, guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act, I think twice in his case. And then there's the Prime Minister's former parliamentary secretary, guilty of contravening the Conflict of Interest Act. What we have, Mr. Chair, is a pattern of conflict and corruption in this government that goes right to the top, right to the Prime Minister.
Serial lawbreakers.
A bunch of serial lawbreakers. Indeed, the Prime Minister, their leader, is probably the biggest lawbreaker amongst them. Now, with respect to the motion that has been put forward by Mr. Barrett, the central question that must be answered is, who's Randy? And where is Randy, by the way? Where is he? In the face, he seems to be in hiding in the face of today's report in the National Post that he fraudulently represented that his company was Indigenous owned to secure millions of dollars of federal contracts. So where is he? It would be nice if he could show his face. But we have an affidavit that was filed on November 5th that we now have a copy of, and contained within the affidavit are a series of exhibits that include new text messages that cast further doubt about the minister's truthfulness when he came before this committee. And I think it's important to look at the track record of this minister when it comes to telling the truth and when it comes to being forthcoming. This is a minister who came to this committee in June and was adamant that he wasn't the Randy in the text messages. But of course, the Gowie group believed at all times that the Randy in the text messages was the Minister of Employment. Stephen Anderson was asked by Global News, who is the Randy in the text messages? And he said, well, it's the VP of Logistics. But when Global News looked into who is the VP of Logistics, they found out that it was not a Randy, it was a guy by the name of Edward Anderson, who turns out to be Stephen Anderson's father, Stephen Anderson being the shady business partner of the Minister of Employment. Global News made further inquiries to find a trace of this other Randy. They couldn't. Stephen Anderson came before the committee and said there was only one Randy that was ever connected to Global Health Imports, and that is the Minister of Employment. And not to mention the fact that in the original text messages that were discovered, the Randy is referenced in the context of being a partner. Well, it turns out that the Minister of Employment was a partner with Stephen Anderson up until he was elected in 2021, and at the time of the text messages, the minister had a 50% ownership stake in the company in Global Health Imports. So in the face of all of that, without any trace of another Randy, without any credible explanation of who this other Randy could be, there is really only one conclusion that can be drawn to the question of who's Randy, and that is that Randy is the Minister of Employment, the minister from Edmonton, a Randy who shook down Global Health Imports in a $500,000 wire fraud scheme, a Randy who was a 50% owner, a partner in a company that has been ordered by Alberta courts to pay back clients $7.8 million for ripping them off.
Unbelievable. Wow. Unbelievable.
We have a minister now who is part of a company that has been sued by the Gowie Group for this $500,000 shakedown when Global Health Imports failed to deliver the PPE that they had ordered pursuant to the contract that they had entered into. And remember when the minister came to committee in June, and one of the things that his office did at the time was issue a statement that said it could not have been the minister because the minister was in Vancouver on September the 8th, 2022, and he was at a cabinet meeting and he didn't have access to his phone, and therefore it was impossible that the Randy in the text messages was the minister. But then, after he appears before the committee the first time, Global News uncovers new text messages. New text messages from September 6, 2022, from between Anderson and the Gowie Group, in which Anderson, as he's shaking them down, for the $500,000 says, asking as West Coast is closing in 7 minutes and Randy is in the Vancouver office. Wow. Oops. Wow. Randy is in Vancouver. Come on, Randy. Well, the minister, turns out, was in Vancouver on September the 6th. Uh-huh. And when the minister came back to committee in September with these fresh text messages, fresh insofar as at the time they had just recently been made public, my colleague, Mr. Barrett, put it to him to say, come on, Minister, you're obviously that Randy. And the minister was confronted with the text messages, admitted that, yes, he was in Vancouver on September 6th, and then he provided new information that he had withheld from the committee, and that is that he had texted and spoken with Anderson on September the 6th. Wow. Now, when the minister came in June, he would have had committee believe that he had nothing to do with Anderson.
Exactly.
That upon being elected in 2021, other than having a 50% ownership stake, which is a pretty big deal, that he never spoke to this guy. He had nothing to do with the operations of the company. He was totally oblivious to what was going on. And then he comes back, confronted with text messages, placing him in Vancouver at the same time that Anderson is referring to a Randy in Vancouver. He suddenly says, oh, by the way, I spoke with Anderson. That constituted a material omission on the part of the minister. The minister, for all intents and purposes, misrepresented to this committee his dealings with Anderson by his omission.
Exactly. Wow.
And so it's part of a pattern of not being forthcoming. It's part of a pattern of a minister who is changing his story as new details emerge. So now that we have these additional text messages that evidence that the minister was not forthcoming and may provide further evidence that the minister was involved in fraud, it will be interesting to see how his story changes when he comes, hopefully, before this committee as soon as possible. Exactly. And so we need to hear from this minister. He shouldn't be a minister. Exactly. He should have been fired long ago as a minister. He has no place sitting in the cabinet, given his record of frankly not being forthcoming, being implicated in this shady business that is ridden by allegations of fraud, and not just allegations of fraud. There are, I just emphasize again, $7.8 million in judgments by Alberta courts against his company, the company that he had a 50% interest in, stemming from lawsuits from the time that he was a partner in the business. So, Mr. Chair, it's important that we pass Mr. Barrett's motion and haul Minister Boissonnault back to this committee.
Hear, hear, hear. Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Fisher, go ahead on the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm listening to the comments by Mr. Barrett and Mr. Cooper. Listen to the comments from Mr. Genius, but those were on a different issue. Those were on the National News Watch story or the National Post story about the Indigenous angle. I don't see anything. So we've supported this motion in the past, or a motion almost exact like this, and we've had this looked at by the Ethics Commissioner every time Mr. Barrett's asked for it to go to the Ethics Commissioner. I seem to recall when we asked him one time, does he look into something when asked by a parliamentarian? I think he said yes. So obviously, if this committee decides to ask again, he'll look into it again. But I don't see anything in the motion that's new. I didn't hear anything in the debate that wasn't new. It was more, let's get some clips talking about this and talking about that. But I didn't hear anything new. Nothing new in this. No, we've seen all that stuff. Well, I feel we've seen it all. So I don't see any sign of anything new while the minister was a minister. So, there's talk about things coming out when he wasn't a minister in between 2019 and 2021. But I don't see anything that's coming up today that's brand spanking new in this motion, other than asking for some different people for the same topic. And one of those people on the list is already pegged to come to this committee. So I guess I'll continue to listen to the debate and continue to listen to the rationale for why we want to do this yet again. It reminds me of that awesome Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day. I expect if you bring the same people in for the same questions, you're going to get the same answers. But again, I'll listen to what other members of the committee have to say.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Housefather, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my confusion stems around the fact that the motion asks us to call the head of the Gowie Group, and then different employees of Global Health Imports who are the subject of a civil claim where the Gowie Group is suing the company for $500,000 approximately. And this committee is not a court. I have no basis to use the words like Mr. Cooper was using before, like shakedown, and making assumptions as to which side is right in a lawsuit that is being taken. I think we were all displeased and dismayed by the testimony of Mr. Anderson, who is one of the defendants in this lawsuit, which is why this committee unanimously voted to recommend to the House to hold him in contempt and bring him before the House. And to me, all of the issues that relate to Mr. Boissonnault, who has testified now twice before the committee on this issue, are ones that relate to Mr. Anderson and his text messages and his telephone calls and claims that he made. And so, to me, we're not going to gain anything related to the ethical behavior of Mr. Boissonnault by bringing Mr. Boissonnault back to the committee a third time, when he will no doubt make the same comments that he made in the first two times that he was here. We have testimony, or at least we have reporters who have interviewed Ms. Gowie, who said that she never spoke directly or communicated directly with Mr. Boissonnault. So all she could possibly offer is hearsay testimony as to her communications with Mr. Anderson. And so I'm at a loss to the point of this motion when these are issues that we're still dealing with and relitigating that we've talked about ad nauseum at the committee. The one thing that I would be willing to entertain is bringing Mr. Anderson back again to ask him the difficult questions, since he has yet to appear before the bar of the House, given the filibustering going on in the House on a different privilege motion. But I certainly don't see, as of now, what value Ms. Gowie brings when she herself has said she's never had any direct relationship, communication with Mr. Boissonnault. So she has nothing that could allow the committee to conclude that he committed an ethical violation, because all that she would know would be what somebody else told her. And bringing Mr. Boissonnault back again for a third time, I don't think yields anything new either. We would need to hear from Mr. Anderson under oath, and being required by the Speaker to answer what it is that caused him to type repeatedly Mr. Boissonnault's name in his text messages. I think we all do not believe that it is credible that this was a spell check issue, and what caused him to use Mr. Boissonnault's name. I could think of many reasons. Mr. Boissonnault himself speculated on what those reasons may be as to why he would use Mr. Boissonnault's name. But I think really the only person that makes sense to hear from is Mr. Anderson. And I think the House should proceed to that privilege motion and bringing him to the bar of the House as quickly as possible. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the floor now, and maybe I'll come back later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.